Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, October 18th. We'll start on Canada's National Front, where access to information continues to shed light on how the federal government is reacting to international pressures. We'll hear about the rising cost of protecting Canadians abroad, a delay in our national security strategy, troubling new questions about intelligence oversight, and one minister who seems ready to give police broader access to personal data. Then, in our scan of provincial stories, there's a major update on the PowerSchool breach that exposed student data across Canada, controversy over phone searches inside the BC Conservative caucus, and new moves to balance transparency with reconciliation at the local level. And finally, we'll head south of the border, where California is expanding privacy protections while rejecting a ban on youth chatbots. The Pentagon faces backlash for new restrictions on journalists, and a Rutgers professor has fled the country after death threats from far-right groups. Let's dive in. Global Affairs Canada says a surge in global instability is creating a massive workload in order to protect Canadians abroad. A new briefing binder obtained through access requests from Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand reveals the department has had to deploy evacuation teams 3 times more often in the past 5 years. The binder notes that both demand and precedents from past crises have meant high financial costs that might need to be controlled. Among the most serious cases, Canadians on death row in the United States, China, and India, and hundreds evacuated from conflict zones including Haiti, Israel, and Gaza. Officials say the $25 consular services fee on passports hasn't changed since 2013, leaving a growing funding gap as more Canadians are caught up in crises. The department warns Canadians may soon need to pay more and expect less as it struggles to cover the cost of global evacuations and hostage diplomacy cases. The briefing also notes that Global Affairs Canada is increasingly asked to help not just citizens, but also permanent residents and their relatives. Global Affairs Canada is unable to cover the costs of larger, prolonged crises, but the department is crafting a plan to ensure what it calls sustainable crisis funding. Separately, a February report obtained by the Canadian press through access to information laws showed that there were 993 Canadians in custody abroad. Additional separate requests through access to information from the Canadian press show how Canada's plan to update its national security strategy has been delayed. A memo to Prime Minister Mark Carney admits that many assumptions were no longer valid, forcing a restart. At a cabinet planning forum early September, Carney said a new national security policy would be released in due course. The uncertainty reflects a global landscape reshaped by conflict, trade tension, and U.S. politics under Donald Trump. Former advisors argue that Canada urgently needs a new, flexible strategy to deal with cyber threats, espionage, and shifting alliances, but the government appears hesitant to release one that could inflame relations with Washington. The report also notes that Prime Minister Carney has already said publicly that Canada's old relationship with the United States is over, and a new partnership must take its place. Staying in Ottawa, other released documents reveal Carney has directed every federal minister to set 3 to 5 measurable objectives for the year, each tied to outcomes Canadians will actually feel. The Privy Council will track progress across ministries, focusing on tangible results like affordability and housing rather than bureaucratic output. Among these goals were creating a new relationship with the United States, building a single Canadian economy, protecting Canadian sovereignty, and spending less on government operations. The effort shows a new push for performance-based governance after months of political turbulence. Carney asked ministers to reflect on how they could contribute to the government's missions and the other most important immediate priorities within their portfolios. They were also directed to state the outcome for each objective, meaning the changes Canadians would experience as a direct result. Finally, Carney said he wanted a means of measuring progress on the stated outcome. Shifting to news at Canada's intelligence agency, In a story that comes as little surprise and another disappointment here at FIPA, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency has found that CSIS lacked proper policies to manage a new secret data collection technology. A newly released report says this led to CSIS not consulting Public Safety Canada in a timely manner concerning its planned use of the technology, contrary to a ministerial direction on accountability. The watchdog says CSIS failed to consult Public Safety Canada, may have breached the CSIS Act, and kept collected data without clearly spelling out the authority for retaining it. In response, CSIS has pledged a robust review of its technology programs, saying it's developing new operating procedures and oversight mechanisms. But the agency disputes some of the findings, insisting its new tools don't expand collection powers and operational risks, a stance that has privacy advocates questioning whether lessons from past overreach are really being learned. Details of the novel technology and how CSIS used it were stripped from the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency report, which included several recommendations. Staying on the topic of federal bills that impact privacy, one federal minister has signaled openness to changing the privacy components of Bill C-2 and new C-12 that would have made it easier for police to access personal data. Civil liberty advocates, including FIPA, continue to recognize that the contentious portions of the bill would permit authorities with a warrant to demand production of an individual's online data, unencrypted emails, and browsing history from a company based solely on reasonable suspicion. That discussion continues in Parliament as privacy experts warn about potential overreach and the need for stronger safeguards before any expansion of police powers online. Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangari suggested there's a need to make it simpler for police to link a phone number of interest to a service provider without the hurdle of obtaining a judicial warrant. But the minister said he's also very sympathetic to concerns that police might, for example, use the provision to associate an individual with a specific medical service provider. RCMP Commissioner Mike Duham said he and the minister would work with other police forces to do everything they could to ensure the measures on law enforcement access to information go forward. As an aside, we would like to remind our listeners that if you worry about how police and surveillance agencies are collecting and using your personal information, those powers pale in comparison to what the political parties themselves can do and are proposing to do in Bill C-4 Part 4. The current and past practice and powers of Canadian police and intelligence agencies to disregard privacy is deeply concerning. The current and proposed powers of federal political parties being enabled through their members of parliament to make those powers pale in comparison as they seek to act without any legislated privacy guardrails. You can help us send a clear message to Ottawa on both issues by contacting your member of parliament and letting them know your thoughts through the links in our show notes. In provincial news, the fallout from the PowerSchool data breach continues to ripple across the country. An American man has been sentenced to 4 years in prison after pleading guilty for orchestrating the cyber attack that compromised student and teacher data across Canada. Court records show the hacker demanded nearly $3 million in Bitcoin, threatening to leak sensitive personal and medical information. The U.S. Attorney's Office previously said in a media release that the perpetrator was a student at Assumption University in Worcester, Massachusetts. PowerSchool paid a ransom in an effort to prevent further exposure, though it did not specify how much it paid. The Canadian Privacy Commissioner started and subsequently ended their investigation after confirming the company's commitment to improved security, but will receive a full independent audit next year. Now, starting on the West Coast, the British Columbia Conservative leader John Rustad is under fire for authorizing searches of caucus members' phones to root out an internal leak. Rustad confirmed that the vast majority of his MLAs agreed to the search, a move critics call a stunning invasion of privacy and a sign of distrust within the party. Rustad promised that looking through members' phones wasn't something the party did on a regular basis. Attorney General Nikki Sharma called the action problematic, while former MLA Eleanor Sturko says it shows why Rustad's leadership is in question. While the leak wasn't found, Rustat said the party expects discipline from caucus members. Also in BC, the government has introduced new legislation allowing municipalities and First Nations to meet privately when discussing culturally sensitive information. BC's Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs said the proposed legislation does not separately define culturally sensitive information, but instead adopts the similar language as found in the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. The president of the Union of British Columbia Municipalities said the proposed changes do not close gaps in current legislation. Government officials say the changes align with privacy law definitions of cultural and traditional knowledge while maintaining the requirement that final decisions be made in public. Supporters call it a practical step toward reconciliation and mutual respect, though questions remain about how closed meetings will be handled in practice. Next, mirroring issues across the country, smaller communities are continuing to balance input, transparency, privacy, and sustainability. In Gibsons, British Columbia, Jordan Kopp, LGI reporter from the Coast Reporter, brings an update from a regular council meeting where we see council considering redesignation of Charman lands as park and conservation space following months of public engagement where additional privacy concerns were raised in density adjustments. Meanwhile, in Ontario, Brock Weir, LGI reporter for the Auroran, reports on the local impacts of October being Canadian Public Libraries Month. Aurora's public libraries are celebrating Libraries for Life Week, with programs emphasizing diversity and freedom of information. Aurora's public library wants to ensure they represent freedom of information, diverse programming, and diverse interests. The wish is to celebrate what libraries mean to society, which is quite a lot. Recognizing they are that classic third place, which is where you can go that isn't your home, isn't your school or work, but a place you can go and be. Another place where everybody can be themselves, find the things they are interested in, and just be calm. Next, from Brian Lockhart, LGI reporter at the New Tecumseh Times, gives us a glimpse into one local public body's policy intersecting artificial intelligence. The Nottasulga Valley Conservation Authority has approved its updated asset management plan and several key policy changes. The plan guides how the authority purchases, maintains, and replaces assets to reduce liability and improve efficiency across the watershed. Highlights also include a new AI safe use policy requiring staff to protect personal data and disclose when artificial intelligence tools are used in their work, a first for the agency. Local officials say the updates aim to make operations leaner, more transparent, and better aligned with environmental and privacy standards. Staying in Ontario, LGI reporter Fatima Syed from the Narwhal reports that the provincial government is moving ahead with a costly Georgian Bay energy project despite warnings from experts. The warnings were shared by the Provincial Crown Corporation responsible for the supply and demand of energy, the Independent Electricity System Operator, in an August 2021 memo obtained via Freedom of Information laws. Shifting to the East Coast and data obtained through access to information. Housing advocates in Newfoundland and Labrador say the province is quietly relocating unhoused residents to other towns, raising new ethical and privacy concerns about data and consent in social services. In documented instances where unhoused people used to stay overnight within their communities, the province has begun to transport them to beds at times an hour away. Individuals indicate they don't want to go and leave their support systems, including family in their town or medical appointments they can't miss, but are now left with no other choice of housing. With the recent election results in Newfoundland and Labrador, this is bound to be one of the issues for the new Conservative Premier designate, Tony Wakeham. Now to south of the border. California is expanding privacy protections for immigrants, passing a new law that shields vendor information from federal immigration agents. The move directly challenges President Trump's renewed deportation push and highlights how Democratic-led states are resisting federal immigration crackdowns through privacy legislation. The new law prohibits local governments from inquiring about vendors' immigration status, requiring fingerprinting or disclosing personal information. The measure, signed into law this past week by Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, comes on the heels of other recently enacted state laws meant to shield students in schools and patients at healthcare facilities from the reach of President Donald Trump's immigration enforcement actions. The law will prevent local governments from disclosing personal data like names, addresses, and social media details without a court order. In the same week, Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed a separate bill that would have banned minors from using AI chatbots. He said the restrictions were too broad and could have amounted to an outright ban. Instead, California will now require clear notices reminding users when they're talking to a chatbot, a compromise praised by the tech industry but criticized by child safety advocates as too weak. The youth AI chatbot ban would have applied to generative AI systems that simulate human-like relationship with users by retaining their personal information and asking unprompted, emotional questions. It would have allowed the state attorney general to seek a civil penalty of $25,000 per violation. However, the tech industry argued that the bill was so broad that it would stifle innovation and take away useful tools for children, such as AI tutoring systems and programs that could detect early signs of dyslexia. Meanwhile, U.S. news organizations are uniting to reject new Pentagon media rules introduced by Trump's Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. The Pentagon has said the rules establish common-sense media procedures and want news outlets to sign a statement acknowledging them, even if they don't agree with them. Networks including Fox, CNN, and the Associated Press say the policy would force them to seek approval before publishing military stories, a move they call unconstitutional and unprecedented. Fox News is just one of the outlets, including ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, that said they are concerned. Only One American News has agreed to the rules. The confrontation could soon end up in court, with journalists warning that the policy threatens public access to critical information about U.S. defense operations. And finally, a Rutgers University professor and anti-fascism expert says he's fleeing the United States with his family after receiving death threats. Mark Bray, author of Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook, says conservative activists falsely branded him a terrorist under Trump's new executive order labeling Antifa a domestic threat, calling for his dismissal. Bray learned of the petition when Fox News contacted him for comment. He said he has since received additional threats and that his home address and personal information about his family were posted on social media. Bray plans to continue teaching remotely from Spain, describing the campaign against him as an attempt to silence academic discourse through intimidation. Bray said that what he is experiencing is part of a broad effort to shut down discourse on college campuses. As always, we hope you found today's stories help you stay informed about the latest issues surrounding privacy, information management, and public transparency. To help us keep the mics on, be sure to subscribe through FIBA News Monitoring or consider a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music in today's show was composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thanks for joining me, and to all our contributors, reporters, and you, our listeners, who help make this podcast possible. Stay safe and stay informed.